Time now to dig deeper into the redistricting process in our state with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representative Paul Ray and House Minority Leader Brian King. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you.
Huge topic. The maps are now set for the next 10 years here in the state of Utah. Representative Ray, you were co-chair of the Legislative Redistricting Committee. I'd like to get your assessment of the map, and let's start with congressional map here in the state of Utah. Your thoughts of the final product.
Well, we put a lot of time and effort in that congressional map, and one of the key principles going into is we wanted to make sure that we had an equal representation between rural and urban Utah. And so I think we accomplished that and keeping our deviations down to zero. So, we put together, I think, a pretty strong map. Obviously, there's people that don't like it, but there's still a lot of people that like it also. And on the Princeton gerrymandering scale, that actually was graded an A before they pulled the grades off on some of the other ones, but we did get an A on that.
Representative King, you voted against it. Why?
I voted against it for the same reason I think that all the Democrats voted against it, which is it just didn't feel like it was part of the same process that we went through with the other three maps that we drew. I know the Democrats on the redistricting committee felt like they had a good collaborative working relationship with the Republicans, but when it came to the congressional map, and the same thing happened to us in 2011 when I was on the redistricting committee, the Republicans just said, thanks, we don't need your help, we'll take care of this ourselves. My suspicion is that the product that we ended up passing in the legislature was something that was formed more outside the state of Utah by Republican or conservative groups and then parachuted into Utah. I don't think it was a good process for that congressional map, and I don't think the final product was a reflection of what Utahns wanted.
Representative Ray addressed that. Outside interests, is that what happened here?
Not sure at all. Myself, Senator Sandel, we sat and drew those maps. We had groups that wanted to get involved, and we actually kept a lot of groups out and kept it local. So there was nothing parachuted in from any other state. This is what we did, and what we took it out to the whole body.
One of the more controversial points was what happened in Salt Lake County. I want to get your both of your thoughts on that. You take a look at Salt Lake County, and a lot of people thought, yeah, maybe it'll be split 2 ways, maybe even 3, but a lot of people didn't see 4 ways coming. Representative King, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah, it's a real problem. I mean, you have to split Salt Lake County. Let's be clear, you got to split it at least one way. I mean, you have to have 2 districts in Salt Lake County. It's too big population-wise to not split. So we're reconciled to that idea. Well, our current situation for the last 10 years, we've had it split 3 ways. There's no good reason to split it 4 ways at all, other than to maximize the likelihood that those 4 congressional districts are held by Republicans and to minimize the likelihood that a Democrat can win. It's not good for communities of interest. It's not a reflection of the will of the people of the state of Utah that they want to have Utah's largest county split 4 ways. And it was one of the primary reasons that you had Democrats and some Republicans voting against that congressional map.
Real quick before we move on to Representative Ray, we've heard a lot about communities of interest. Representative King, dig into that a little more. What is it, and how do you feel they were not best served in this process?
Communities of interest, and keeping communities of interest together to the greatest extent possible is one of a number of core principles of good redistricting. And we tried to do that at the legislature. And I felt like the maps involving the State House, the State Senate, and the school board reflected that to a much greater degree than the congressional map. You're going to have to split some communities of interest in any redistricting process, that's true. But to do it so directly and flagrantly, so explicitly when you're talking about splitting Salt Lake County 4 ways, that county should be kept to no more of a split than to have 2 congressional districts that it has to deal with in order to reflect the wishes of the individuals who live in Salt Lake County.
Representative Ray addressed 2 things here. Why was Salt Lake County split into 4 districts, and the community of interest issue?
Well, my first thing is define community of interest. There's no definition to that. So there are thousands, tens of thousands of communities of interest that you could look at. So, what we looked at was geographical, city, county, those types of things. And then Salt Lake County is the population base for the state of Utah. So this is where the majority of the population was, and where a good percentage of the population growth was that southwest corner of Salt Lake County. So when we divided, we wanted to make sure we kept the urban and the rural mixed together, and you can't do that without divisions in Salt Lake County. And so we thought if you really want to look at communities of interest, you need to talk rural communities of interest also and how to keep those. So the dividing line ended up being 3900 South, which was honestly just based on population and where people were and how we had to divide those four to get an equal representation for rural and urban Utah.
Representative King, picking up this communities of interest issue again, as Representative Ray just asked, define it. How do you define it?
Well, it's defined by cities and towns, it's defined by counties. As I said earlier, you're always going to have splits in communities of interest. What you're trying to do is minimize them to the greatest extent possible. And there's no question that Utah is a relatively urban or at least suburban area compared to its rural population. There are plenty of states, many states, in fact most states in this country, that have a greater percentage of their population rural than Utah does. So the idea that you have to have 4 districts that mix rural and urban, that's not true at all. And it's not a reflection of the reality of how people in Utah live. So my only point is, there's a better way of preserving communities of interest such as Salt Lake County than to split it so flagrantly into 4 almost equally divided pieces.
Representative Ray, Representative King brought up something earlier I want to get your thoughts on, and that being that these districts are drawn to maintain Republican control. Is that what happened?
These districts were drawn based on population. You know, if we want the urban and rural mix and you want to make it even, that's how we divided them up. You know, they end up, I mean, Utah's a Republican state, so it's hard to say we're going to create a Democrat district and not gerrymander to a Democrat district. And if you look at the IRC maps, that's kind of what you saw. It's what's called packing. You know, they took all the Democrats and packed them into one district and then made it 3 extremely strong Republican districts. And what we did is say, wait, we're just going to divide it by 4 and put it out there, and that's what we did.
Representative King, Democrats have had success in the 4th Congressional District. Do you believe the way it was drawn this time will eliminate that?
I think it certainly reduces that. In the same way that Representative Ray talks about packing members of one party into one district, you can crack individuals in a way that results in a greater likelihood for a minority population politically being unable to control any seat because you crack them up, you spread them up equally in equal minority proportions among the number of districts that you're talking about. So packing and cracking are very well understood and known in the redistricting process. You can use either one if you want to achieve political ends. In this particular congressional map, we saw cracking used to ensure that there's a greater likelihood that Republicans will have 4 safe seats in Utah.
Address something Representative Ray said there, though, because when you take a look at the numbers, Democrats are small in number when it comes to the Republican Party and unaffiliated voters in the state of Utah. So how do you then make a competitive Democratic district without doing what we're talking about, gerrymandering?
It's not difficult. I mean, what we had is a competitive Democratic district with CD4 right now, and you saw Ben McAdams, Representative McAdams, hold that seat. You saw, of course, Jim Matheson hold it for a number of years before that. Then Mia Love came in and held it for a term or 2. So that was a competitive seat, relatively speaking. What you've got right now are 4 new seats, none of which are as competitive as CD4 currently is and has been for the last 10 years.
Representative Ray, talk about the process. You were involved with it as the co-chair of the committee. What worked, what didn't, and what would you like to see moving forward?
Well, first of all, CD4 had 65,000 people too many, so it had to move, it had to change. So that's what we did. And you know, I think looking at it overall, I think we really bipartisan on most of these maps. We worked really well across the aisle, made sure that everybody was involved. Congressional maps, those were actually the last maps we drew. It was a lot harder to draw 75 House districts. You know, and then we came in and finished up with congressional districts. And so, you know, I think moving forward, I think the hard part is we need to go back at some point and evaluate, you know, do we need the redistricting commission or not? You know, was it money well spent? I think that's something over the next few years that we can look back on and say, is this something to continue moving forward? Is there changes that we need to make, or do we just not do it going forward?
Representative King, your thoughts on that? $1 million for that commission, and in the end, their work was not adopted.
That's right.
Moving forward, what should the role of that commission be?
I think you've got to keep that commission in place, and here's why. Utah voters spoke in 2018. There was a lot of time and effort put into initiative Proposition 4, the Better Boundaries Initiative, and people came out in numbers that were great and they voted for it. It wasn't by a huge margin, but it was a yes vote on Proposition 4, Better Boundaries. We need to honor the will of Utahns. they've spoken. That was a campaign that was funded well, and there was a great debate on both sides of the issue. Utahns came out in 2018 in record numbers and voted yes.
Okay, I'm running out of time, so I just want to give Representative Ray about 10 seconds to respond to that point. It was the will of the people in 2018.
It passed in 4 counties. It barely passed by a few thousand votes. And I think had you not had marijuana and other things on the ballot, that would have failed miserably. And I know as I talked to people in my district, there really was not a lot of interest in the commission. And constitutionally, it's the legislature's job to do that.
Okay.
I'm not sure why we're spending $1 million to have somebody else come in and advise us.
We're going to have to end it on that note, gentlemen. Great conversation. It did pass, you're right, by about 7,000 votes, a very close one. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your analysis today.
Thank you.